Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, and I'm joined by Thomas Harrington. We have a special show. We're not going to really talk about the Ducks games. We're going to focus on the trade deadline since that's coming up. And Eddie is still dealing with some personal stuff like we talked about on the last show. So I have Thomas here with me. We're gonna break down. We're pretty much going to go through the Ducks' entire roster. Is kind of how the show's going to go. We're going to talk about the defense, the offense, the goalies, and maybe some unique trades and things that could maybe happen, and just kind of our overall feel as the trade deadline approaches. So thanks for joining again, Thomas. I'll probably have you on a couple more times as the season goes.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, and happy to fill in for Eddie when he can't make it.
All right, well, let's just dive into it. Just a quick reminder that the podcast is part of the Old City Sports Network. A lot of sponsors on there. Check them out. Norse Beards is one of their ones for your grooming needs. NorseBeards.com, and OCS is the code for a discount. So, all right, with that, let's dive into this. Lots of news about the Ducks recently, actually, with trade rumors flying, all kinds of different things going on. We'll start out with the defense. Kind of break it down a little bit. The Athletic had their top 25 trade list. Klingberg, no surprise, was in that top 10. He was number 6. You had Kulikov on there and Shattenkirk as well. So we'll start out with Klingberg. We knew going into this season that it looked like he's going to be traded at the deadline. The UFA, he's got his modified no trade clause, which kicked in the middle of the season. I don't think there's any doubt that he's gone at the trade deadline. I think the question is as to what teams and for what kind of value. And I think that's kind of the issue. He did kind of have a minor injury recently, but it sounds like he'll be okay. But Thomas, what do you think? A lot of people are like, first round pick. Let's try and sign him. Let's get the Ducks above the cap floor, which is what they did. But the way things have turned out this season haven't quite gone what the Ducks expected.
No, it's fair to say Klingberg on a team full of disappointments has arguably been the biggest disappointment for the team. Like, we thought it'd be one of two things: either A, he's fitting great and may not lead the Ducks to the playoffs, but help them be competitive, or B, the Ducks are bad, he'd still at least be good and could get a great return at the deadline. Well, it's been C, neither of those things. The Ducks have been awful, and so has he. And what I thought was a sure first-round pick back in the summer, if he was traded, honestly, I'm hoping it's similar to what we got from Manson last year. A second-round pick and a good prospect. Not a great one, but a good one. And that feels like it's settling, but with the seasons he's had, honestly, that might be hoping for too much at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of rough. I'm almost at the point of taking a second round pick and running. I hate to say that, but that's kind of where I feel. I'm with you. I would like another prospect, and maybe not a great one as you suggest, but at least something decent. It's been tough. I mean, he's had 7 goals in 48 games. His plus minus is negative 29, which is the worst on the team. Granted, we talked about, the blue line for the Ducks has been just beyond awful, unfortunately, but that's what I'm kind of thinking as a second round pick, and it just depends on, he's a rental candidate for a contender. Unless a contending team wants him and then wants him long term, maybe that does where you get that other pick in there. But what are some teams that you think maybe the Ducks can shop him around for, Thomas?
So you've got to be the kind of team who I think needs help on the power play, because let's be honest, Klingberg is not going to help you defensively, but he can help you score some goals. He can help a struggling power play. So a couple teams that jump out to me, first and foremost, is Carolina. They are, as of Wednesday night, 22nd in the league on the power play. They are one of the best teams in the league this year, and frankly, I think they're one of the few teams that has a chance against Boston, but that power play is potentially a huge weakness. If they can bring in Klingberg and he can reinvigorate it, that could be huge for them. So I think Carolina is one to really watch. One that's mentioned before, Seattle, they've got 3 second-round picks. Heck, if they get 2 of those, that'd be amazing for Klingberg at this point. Washington's fading, but another team who wants to make the playoffs. They've struggled in the power play. And Vegas also not that great, 19th in the power play. New Jersey one of the biggest surprises for me this year is 18th on the power play. I think any of those teams make a lot of sense for Klingberg because they need help on the man advantage. So someone like Klingberg, maybe he gives them that extra boost, even if it's just on the second power play, just making them a little more dangerous. But you need a team like that. So I think any of those teams, maybe Calgary even, maybe even Pittsburgh, is a team that's going to make the playoffs. Well, Calgary might not, but they're hoping to, and a better power play might get them there. So a team that's battling for the playoffs and needs help on the power play is what I think makes the most sense for Klingberg at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you. You know, one of the teams you mentioned, too, that was in there recently in the news that was interesting was Vegas. What did you think about the trade that they did? Because it looks like they're trying to clear out some cap space and obviously make some more deals.
I mean, I think it's almost every deadline. Vegas has made a big splashy move, and they did recently put Mark Stone on long-term injured reserve, so they have a surprisingly ungodly amount of cap space right now, despite having a huge payroll. So, they wouldn't take Klingberg at 7, but Klingberg at 3.5, I think, could be very interesting to them. So yeah, they potentially could be a huge player at the deadline because of the Stone on the on long-term IR and also getting rid of Weber's cap hit to Arizona, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I took as that as well. So I think Vegas is definitely a team to watch. One that, as you point out, the Ducks could potentially make a trade for too as well. And if not Klingberg, the other defensemen that have been out there mentioned a lot. We had Kulikov listed on there, Shattenkirk. My feeling is maybe one of these two goes. I don't know if both. It'd be interesting. You got Kulikov at $2.2 million. He's also got modified no trade clause, 8-team no trade list. Some teams that have been connected to him were Boston or LA. I don't really know about the Kings. The Ducks and Kings don't trade so much, but
Donald was the last one they did, and that was 15 years ago or something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have to double check, but you're right. It's definitely been over a decade for sure. I mean, the Ducks and Kings they just don't make trades. But
yeah, I think that was like the second trade ever was when it was O'Donnell, and I don't think it's been one since then.
Yeah, I think you're right. They haven't made many, 2 or 3 max for sure. So I don't. Some people mention LA. I don't see LA being one in there. But Gavrikov is. One that's a big front runner out there, and some people are thinking if he doesn't go to Boston, that maybe Boston is in the mix for Kulikov. So I'm really interested to see. A good point here is you've got Shattenkirk, right, the more aging veteran, $3.9 million. The UFA at the end of the season, also modified no trade clause. It sounds like he's been open to having an extension with the Ducks, but that hasn't happened. Peter LeBrun thinks the Ducks would be more likely to trade him than Kulikov. That's kind of my feeling too. I mean, again, this goes towards the rebuild and what kind of rebuild we're doing. That's what I would think. I would think that they would go more with Shattenkirk being traded and keeping Kulikov, but I don't know. What do you think between these guys? What's your take, Thomas?
I think Shattenkirk. I mean, he's Klingberg light, right? He's a right-hand defenseman. He brings offense from the blue line, but he's not as good. He is older. So Klingberg light. So a team that misses on Klingberg, maybe they'll take Shattenkirk for obviously less than what Klingberg is paid for. Kulikov is a different market. I think Boston makes sense because, they're one of the best teams. They are the best team in the league right now, full stop. And they have to be one of the favorites for the Stanley Cup. And when you're the favorite with very few holes in your roster, what do you always want to get just to be safe? Depth on defense. So I think Kulikov makes a lot of sense for Boston because that's exactly what he is. He's depth on defense. He can be that 6th, 7th, 8th defenseman on their team that maybe plays a few games in the playoffs, maybe plays none, maybe plays every game, but you know what you're going to get from him in a very limited role. So I think Kulikov to Boston makes a ton of sense. Kulikov to LA makes less sense, but you know what? If LA is willing to overpay for him, I will happily trade Kulikov to Los Angeles. Do it if you can get a great return from them. The other thing to keep in mind, though, as the Ducks are moving out Klingberg and others, is to keep an eye on the salary cap. The Ducks do need to stay above the floor. So in that regard, keeping Shattenkirk might make more sense because of his higher salary than Kulikov with the 3.9 versus 2.2. So we'll see. Honestly, if I had my way, I would try and trade all three, assuming you can get a half-decent return for all three. If the best you're going to get for Kulikov or Shattenkirk is a 7th-round pick, and you think re-signing one of them for next year to help just be a vet for the young guns, I'm okay with that too, because Shattenkirk, as a veteran presence to help with Drysdale, to help with Zellweger, Mitchikov, is probably worth more than a 7th-round pick to the Ducks next season. So it all depends on what the return is. Personally, I think trade them all. But if the return's that low, having a veteran D-man is not a bad thing.
So I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate because I've seen some people that were concerned about this. So say you do trade all three and the returns are, the draft picks or maybe prospects, but not necessarily another defenseman on your roster. Are you somewhat concerned because now you're looking at, okay, you still have Fowler if he doesn't get moved. It doesn't seem like he will. He hasn't really been talked about as much. You have Beaulieu on there. You have White, Benoit. You have Vakanainen, which is on the IR. We haven't heard a whole lot about him. Drysdale maybe comes back at the end of the season. We don't know. Again, I haven't heard a lot about him. But what's your feeling? What would the Ducks do? Like if they ship out these three guys, they get whatever returns that they get, but they don't necessarily get a top 4 defenseman. Does that concern you at all?
It does and it doesn't, because even with them, the Ducks have been awful. Can they really be that much worse with someone else in there? And I don't know. Maybe, God, I hope not. But you never know. I think what's going to happen is after the deadline, assuming 1 to 3 of them are traded, because to me, Klingberg has to be traded. If Klingberg is not traded, to me, that's a failure by Verbeek.
Agreed.
The other two, if they're not, I don't think that's a failure. But if Klingberg is not, that is a failure. You can bring up Michael Del Zotto from San Diego. The Ducks reacquired him a little while ago, and he's been actually one of the few decent players for the Gulls this season. You could bring up, Olio Levy, Austin Strand. You can have Drew Hellison make his NHL debut. You've got some players in San Diego. Even though the Gulls have been bad, you still could at least give them a chance in the NHL to give them a taste of it. Also, it does sound like when his college season's over, Jackson LeCombe will sign with the Ducks. So he's someone else who actually could get some time in the AHL. Probably sometime in, I think the NCAA tournament is over in mid-April usually. So depending on how far they go can impact when he can join the team. So there are players they could bring up. And also, you trade Klingberg, you can also bring back, whoever, let's say Klingberg is traded to Calgary. If they have a 7th defenseman, you can take that 7th defenseman back as well, because they probably will need to get rid of some cap space anyways, and there's somebody you can then plug in. There also will probably be defensemen on waivers between now and the trade deadline. That's how... Who was they got? Was it Del Zotto at the deadline who was on waivers last year that they picked up? Or there was someone a year or two ago they picked up on waivers just to fill in as an AHL body. So they can probably look to do that again this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that they'll definitely have to bring up some people from the Gulls for sure. I did like White and Strand, how they did earlier in the season. Their analytics were actually pretty decent. So maybe
that
you
was
give
surprising.
them. Yeah, that was. Maybe you give them a shot, right? And let them do their thing. And then, like you said, you have Hellison as well. Del Zotto. Del Zotto's interesting because he was involved in that 3-way trade. And that's something I think the Ducks should keep an eye on. This trade deadline is, looking at the cap space for a lot of these teams. If you go on Cap Friendly, a lot of the teams don't have cap space. A lot of them are using LTIR. I want to say, looks like almost
16 teams.
Yeah, half the league. I was just gonna say, half the league is up against the cap. Using LTIR is crazy. So I think that, I don't want the Ducks to go crazy and do a lot of these, maybe these 3-way trades, but Thomas, I think it may happen that the Ducks could be somehow involved in a trade like that, or maybe you see something like the Weber thing where the Ducks take on someone's contract to get picks, especially like you said, if Klingberg and Shattenkirk are both moved out, because now you're talking about, a big chunk of cap space going out. So I think that's another thing that maybe the Ducks look at.
I think so too. So for the Ducks, when they trade Klingberg, I'm anticipating that they will keep half of his salary, $3.5 million, and you can retain salary on 3 contracts. So they'll retain salary on his. For the rest of them, I don't think the Ducks necessarily want to retain salary because, Kulikov at $2.25 million, you could retain, but it's not going to make a big difference either way. I think they're going to try and bring someone back in that regard. So if you're only retaining salary on one player you move out, then you can absolutely be a third-party broker. Minnesota bought themselves a 4th-round pick by being part of the O'Reilly trade to Toronto. So if let's say Patrick Kane gets traded, the Ducks could very easily pick up a quarter of his cap hit and get paid, a 4th-round pick by whoever the team who's getting Kane is. So I think that's something the Ducks should absolutely explore. Get a free fourth-round pick. You've got a ton of cap space. You're not going to actually owe the player very much money because it's a quarter of his remaining salary for the season, which is, a quarter of the season? So, let's say, I'm not sure what Kane's exact cash value is, but let's say he's owed $10 million. So a quarter of that is $2.5 million for the rest of the season, and then it's a quarter of that, 2.5 is what the Ducks would actually have to pay him. So that's pretty cheap to buy a fourth-round pick in my mind. So if you can get a fourth or even a third-round pick by doing that, absolutely. There is actually a really interesting one, and that's Erik Karlsson in San Jose, who signed for, 4 more seasons? And there's no way San Jose trades him without retaining salary. But they don't want to retain a lot of salary because his cap hit is over $11 million. And it would be really hard to get another team to be a third-party broker in that case because you don't want to take dead cap for 4 future seasons. But if, let's say, Edmonton was taking that back and the Ducks could get 2 first-round picks or something, or a first-round pick from Edmonton and a second-round pick from San Jose, in that case, I would consider that scenario, but I still think that'd be very unlikely to happen.
It's interesting. You brought up San Jose, which I know Eddie and I talked about before. We had talked, Kane has been one we had talked about, also with Chicago too. I think maybe there's something with either one of those to happen because it sounds like Patrick Kane could be on the move now. There's a report that the Rangers could be interested in him. There's all kinds of stuff that is going on that I don't know. It's interesting to see.
Clause.
Go ahead.
He's got a full removal clause, so he has the power in this. If he wants to leave, he can say, "I will leave only to XYZ," or he can say, "You know what? I'm going to stay here." So he's got the power in this situation.
It's interesting. I don't know. I'm really curious to see what happens in Chicago. They're also saying that maybe some players may be interested in Jonathan Toews as well, which I think is a crazy situation because he's had some health issues. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with Chicago, Patrick Kane, Toews. I'm curious to see San Jose as well, and I think that the Ducks somehow could end up in one of those three-way trades. Like you said, maybe try to get a pick out of that. That might be the best way to go. So it's another thing to keep in mind as we work our way through the trade deadline. I wouldn't be, totally shocked if something like that happens, but I don't want it to be crazy. I want the Ducks to be doing 2 or 3 of these, but I could see maybe one of those happening with some of those teams that you're mentioning there, Thomas.
Yeah, and I think Toews, I saw because of the long COVID, he's not going to be traded. He's going to focus on getting healthy, and honestly, maybe he retires after this year because of the COVID issues he's been having. But maybe he comes back next year. We'll see.
Yeah, I think the same thing. It was interesting. I saw a little rumor on there just recently, so I was like, huh, okay. Well, I doubt it, but I'm with you. Yeah, unfortunately, and I wish the best to him. In his whole situation. So the blue line, we're pretty sure that something's going to happen here. We think Klingberg should go. I agree with you. If he's not moved, that's a failure. We think the Ducks move one or both, Kulikov or Shattenkirk. We'll have to see how that goes. Talking about offense, I think the core is there. We've talked about Terry. We've talked about Zegras. Of course, Terry's out hurt. And McTavish, you've got the core 3, and then other names have come up. You had Elliot Friedman talking about Comtois and thinking that that the Ducks need to move on him. We heard talk about it last trade deadline. It didn't happen. One thing that Eddie and I talked about was maybe Puljujarvi. He's been kind of struggling. If that's something that could be in the works, something like that. He's been scratched a lot. He's only got 5 goals in 44 games. So talking offensively, working our way through some of the lineup here, what is your thought on Comtois as his name is now resurfaced again per Elliot Friedman?
I think it's time, unfortunately. His game, for whatever reason, has really just gone downhill, and I think he needs to change and the Ducks need to change. And, if he takes off, if he does leave, then great for him. If he doesn't, then, well, that's unfortunate. It was a couple years ago, he had 16, 17 goals and looked not like a future star, but like a very good young winger to have for a very long time. And for whatever reason, these last 2 years, he has just hit a wall and just regressed severely, unfortunately.
I know, and I think that's the other issue too. Is what kind of value can you get for Comtois? He's $2 million RFA. You have his rights. if you're not trading for a player, I mean, are you thinking, third round pick? I mean, I don't. Maybe. What do you think?
I'd like a second round pick. A third round might be more likely. Yeah, I think he's one that a team like Buffalo would be interested in because, again, they want someone who's not a rental but someone they can keep around for a long time. So as a restricted free agent, they control his rights for at least the next couple of years, if not long term, if they were to sign him long term. Though I don't think anyone would do that right now. But I think a team like Buffalo or Detroit would be more interested in him than a team like, let's say, Boston.
The sad thing is watch, he gets traded and then he goes off. I hope that doesn't happen. I don't know. It's just, we've seen it before, but that's one thing I'm afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes players just need something different. And we know he can score, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's confidence, is his work ethic, is it his something I can't identify is just not working right now. And I don't think it's just Aikens either. Like, Aikens gave him a lot of chances, a lot of rope, and he just has not been able to put it all together for 2 years now.
Yeah, and there's also been a little bit of talk of like attitude in the locker room too, possibly as well, and maybe that's why he's been scratched a couple times. I mean, nothing verified on that front, but there's been talk of that maybe he's not fitting in. Or with the team a little bit, unfortunately. So if that's the case, then maybe it's definitely time to move on from him. But I definitely think that he's one that's going to be shopped around. Some of the other more common names we know, again, Elliot Friedman mentioned this in his last article, was Henrique. He's got that $5.8 million contract, UFA in 2024-25, and he's also got modified no trade clause. A lot of these guys have that we're talking about. I'm really curious because with him, I think there are some teams out there that could take on a center. I know Eddie talked about Colorado. He actually wrote that in an article at the end of November when we were talking about trade. This is how bad the Duck season is. We were talking about trades at the end of November with this team. I mean, just 2 months into the season, but Colorado was one that he had mentioned. Obviously, Eddie follows the Avs too, but I'm kind of concerned now because he got hurt in this last game against Tampa Bay. We don't know the extent of the injury, so I mean, I don't know if we will know because obviously the trade deadlines are up around the corner, but I wonder if that's going to be a stumbling block. And then the other part, of course, is going to be the contract too, if anybody's willing to take that on, or if the Ducks retain some of it. And then see how maybe draft picks work out in that. I mean, I don't know. I would have said before the Tampa Bay game, I would have said, oh, there's a good chance he's gone, but I don't know the status of the injury, so I don't know. With Henrique, it's kind of a question mark now for me, Thomas. If it's a minor injury, then I think there's a good chance, but we just don't know where he's at after that game.
Even if he's out for let's say the next 3 or 4 weeks, you still have him at least for this playoff run and next year as well. So he still has decent value, but definitely is a little impacted. I think Colorado makes sense. I mean, I think ever since they lost Kadri over the summer, they've been looking for a new second-line center. I don't know if Henrique is the answer, but he could certainly help fill that role. As for retaining salary, the issue with Henrique is you are retaining into next year. And again, since teams can only have 3 retained salaries, you are already limiting yourself going into next season by doing that. So if you retain Henrique's salary or anyone signed beyond this season, you really want to get something really extra for that. That's why I said, if you did Carlson earlier, that's retained salary for 4 more seasons. You need a lot to take back in that regard. So for Henrique right now, he might net you a second-round prospect. He might net you just a first. If you're retaining salary on Henrique, you need a first and a prospect because you are limiting yourself next year if you are retaining salary on him.
Yeah, I agree because you're right. You got the extra year in there. So, if the Ducks do retain, a first-round pick should be coming back. So that's definitely one I think that they'll entertain as well. And there are some teams out there that need centers. So, I still think that there's a market for him. I just... hopefully the injury is not serious. Like you said, you're right, though. Say he was out for a week or two, he's still there to make that cup run for a contending team, a playoff push, and then you do have next season. So maybe it doesn't hurt his value as much, like you said. So that one's another one, take note on it. He's been mentioned before, nothing new. We knew when he was, sent down with Bob Murray and all that went on, and then obviously he's been in better graces with Verbeek, but doesn't mean that he's safe. He can still be on the move. Another one with a contract that's kind of interesting, and obviously his name's been floated out there too, is Silverberg, $5.25 million, also UFA in 24-25, and been struggling. 6 goals in 56 games this season. With him, I think it's even tougher. I don't think the value is as high there as Henrique, unfortunately. Henrique's had a decent season where Silfverberg's, struggled and mightily recently. So, I think the Ducks try and shop him around, but I don't know if there's a really solid value that they can get in return for him. What do you think, Thomas?
The one thing Silfverberg has going for him is he is a proven playoff performer. He was great every time in the playoffs, except I think 2018 when they were all bad for the Ducks. And even though he's not the player he once was, he could still be very valuable to a team for 2 postseason runs. But right now, I think he has little value. I think he's much more likely to be traded next year than right now, because teams aren't going to want him for a year and change. They want him for a couple months, and that's it as a rental. So I think next year he's much more likely to be traded than he is this year. And unfortunately, the injuries have really just slowed him down. But hey, maybe there's a team that's like, you know what, he was great in the playoffs 5-6 years ago. Maybe he'll be great now, but I just don't see it happening this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if it happens, and if it does, the value is maybe not as high as what we think it is. Maybe he, bounces back towards the end of the season or the beginning of next season, and maybe it works out a little bit better. Another one that's kind of interesting, you have Derek Grant in the mix, which, he's been okay this year. He hasn't been horrible, but I don't know. With him being a UFA at the end of the season, his contract was only $1.5 million. Maybe someone tries to pick him up as a fourth line player for a $1 million deal. Later on down the road or something, and sign him to another year. But I could see Grant going maybe for a pick or something. What do you think on moving Derek? As he's a UFA too at the end of the season.
I think it makes sense to try and move him, but he's only played 20 games this year because of injury. So I think because of that, the market is going to be more limited. So when the Ducks last traded him was in 2020, they got back a 4th-round pick and a minor league player. And at this point, that's probably the best you can hope for because of how little he's played this season. But yeah, if you can trade him and get a similar return, great. I'm just not sure what the market is going to be for him or how many teams are going to be that interested in him.
Yeah, I agree. He has limited action for sure, so that's another thing to take in consideration as far as moving him out. Some kind of a pick maybe, but if it may be a super low pick and it might not even be worth it. Maybe you let him walk next season, or maybe you do sign him to like a real like I said, $1 million deal and bring him back for a year.
And he's usually plays his best hockey with the Ducks, so why not?
Yeah, exactly. So that might be the possibility with him. Maybe you just bring him back as a depth guy. One other person that's kind of interesting on here is, what do you think about Isaac Lundestrom? $1.8 million RFA at the end of the 23-24 season. He's had flashes of greatness, but he's also been kind of inconsistent. You think that's a guy that maybe the Ducks put out there? He's just got the couple goals this year in 37 games, but he's shown he can play.
He's one I would definitely consider dangling, but he is one I would not trade unless it was actually a really, really good offer, because his offense this year has been non-existent, but let's be honest, that's been true for a number of players. He's missed time because of injury, but honestly, since coming back, I thought he's been one of the Ducks' better forwards. I know that's not saying a lot, but he's still actually been surprisingly good. He's only 23. He's a natural center. He can also play wing. He's good on the PK. He's signed to a cheap contract through next season. He is not great, but he's a good 3rd, 4th line center. And you know what? Because of that age, the Ducks don't need to trade him. If someone like, say, Buffalo wants to go and say, hey, I'll pay you a lot to get Lundstrom, absolutely trade him in a heartbeat. He's not someone who I would put on the don't do dare trade list like I would say Zegras or Terry, but he's someone I put on the list of, right now, make it worth my while if you want him from me, because he actually does have decent worth to a team because of that age, because of that cap hit, and even though he hasn't shown this year, because of that all-around ability he has.
Yeah, he's only 23 years old, as you said, and he can play center, he can play wing. If you're gonna move out Henrique, obviously you still have Zegras at center. If they want to keep playing him there, McTavish at center too, depending on what the Ducks want to do. It seems like they've kind of messed around with both those guys a little bit as far as they're playing. But I mean, you could have those guys potentially at center, and then Lundestrom as well, and that can be your three guys there. You also have Strome obviously in the mix too, so you still have enough centers, is what I'm getting at. If you move Henrique and then keep Lundestrom in the mix, unless they try to go get someone else. Obviously, as we talked about Grant too, but that's fourth line. Don't really know if there's a future for Grant with the Ducks at all this season. But the offense, it doesn't seem like as much may happen at the trade deadline. As we talked about, the Ducks have their big three, so to speak: Zegras, McTavish, and Terry. They're going to try and build around that. They picked up Strome and Vetrano. I don't see those guys going anywhere. The top heavy contracts, as we talked about, are Henrique or Silverberg. So I think the Ducks will try to move those. Maybe one of those goes. So like we talked about in the defense, you talked about it could be all three. I'm thinking at least 2 out of 3. Here, I'm thinking it's going to be probably at least 2. And if I had to predict, I would say Comtois and Henrique are probably the ones that get traded in terms of the forwards. What is your final say, do you think, Thomas?
I think Comtois is probably the most likely. And after that, it's either Henrique or Grant. Grant, again, there's not a lot of market, but he's someone a contending team would like to have for cheap. I could see him being moved. Henrique takes a little more difficulty because of that contract going into next season, and if the Ducks are willing to retain on that salary or not. So I think Comtois is the most likely, and then I could see, I think second is either Henrique and or Grant.
All right. Before we move on, we got a big section here on the goalies that we'll talk about, and maybe some unique trades coming the Ducks' way. Just want to remind you guys that are part of the Old City Sports Network. A bunch of the different sponsors we have, they're all listed in the description box with all the codes and everything in there. So check them out on there. One of the good ones we have is Fanatics. You can go in there and get Ducks gear for a discount as well. So check it out all in the description box. All right, so I guess the big part of this is in net. A lot of talk about Gibson in previous seasons. Now there's more talk about him now. He was mentioned in an NHL.com article. Elliot Freeman mentioned him in his recent 32 Thoughts article. He also went on Duckstream and talked about him as well. So a lot of talk about in net and like what do the Ducks do. So we kind of have an idea of defense and offense, what they're going to kind of do. Maybe not too many surprises based upon kind of, we could be completely wrong. But from what we're hearing and talking about, sounds like what we're saying, some of those things are going to happen, maybe not big surprises. The question now is in goal, big debate. I feel like this is a debate in every Ducks post, especially when they lose, people go nuts on this. But you have Gibson, you have Stolarz, you have Dostal. What are the Ducks going to do? Some people are talking about, like on the NHL.com article, they said, hey, if the Ducks trade Gibson, they're going all in, like full rebuild, just tear it down, let's go. Another option they were saying is, hey, hang on to him, wait till the Ducks are a contender again, and do it. And I thought it was interesting reading the article because they kind of went back and forth, and they talked about stuff we mentioned on the show, how Gibson's trade value was higher maybe a couple seasons ago, and now obviously it's gone down a little bit. But I don't know. I think out of these three, someone's got to go. I kind of lean more towards Stolarz, but that's kind of my initial thing. What do you think, Thomas? I mean, a lot of talk about this, especially Gibson lately. You think the Ducks full rebuild, trade Gibson and roll with like Stolarz and Dostal, or you think they trade Stolarz and go the other way? How do you feel about this?
So I think one of the most important things the Ducks can do right now is after the deadline, make sure Dostal is on the roster the rest of the season. That means trading Gibson, Stolarz, or waiving Stolarz, doesn't matter. Make sure Dostal is with the Ducks and getting, half the starts going down the stretch. And let's really see what he can do against NHL competition. And I think he's looked good, but not great. But, behind this defense, who would look great? But even Marty Brodeur is going to struggle behind this team right now. So let's give him a taste of NHL action. Really make sure you're comfortable with him. And next year, have him not be your starter, but probably be your backup. And maybe even take over the starter event later that year or the year after. But you want Dostal in that as much as possible, facing NHL competition, I think, to end the year. So that means you got to figure out what to do with Gibson and Stolarz. The easiest thing is to trade Stolarz, or at least that's my thought going into the season. Unfortunately, he's been injured, and again, because behind this team, his numbers had been bad this season, just like Gibson's. So his trade value is unfortunately really low. I think it would have been better if the Ducks had traded him last summer, but who knows what his trade value was back then also. But I think it was higher than before this year started. Like, I think over the summer, maybe you get a third-round pick from him. Today, honestly, maybe a fifth or a sixth-round pick with between his injuries and his overall numbers. But that's the easy thing, is to trade him. The hard one is trade Gibson, because, again, there's not a lot of teams that are going to trade for John Gibson right now. He's going to be paid $6.4 million for 4 more years after this one. And that's a lot for a goaltender. Now, if you're a team that's on the cusp, you might risk it. If you're a team that thinks you're going to be on the cusp in the next 1, 2, 3 years, that makes more sense. So I think a team like Buffalo, maybe, Pittsburgh, maybe, because they're going for that last gasp with Crosby and Malkin. But you've got to make the cap work, and that's hard for a goalie that is going to be signed for that long. And there's no way Ducks retain that unless they are given just a boatload of picks and prospects. And I think a team would be crazy to give up that much to get Gibson. Like, if you give Gibson at $3.2 million, that'd be wonderful, but not expensive, 3 first-round picks and 2 great prospects, which is what I think it would take, something along those lines, to make the Ducks have dead cap for the next 4 seasons and only be able to retain 2 salaries for 2 contracts over those 4 seasons instead of the usual 3. So it would take a lot to get John Gibson right now. So I think Stolarz, he's the easier one, but the market may not be there. So post-trade deadline, if he's still here, I think the Ducks should waive him and put him in San Diego, which I hate to say because I like Stolarz a lot, but you got to get Dostal playing as many Angel games as possible down the stretch.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that was one thing at the beginning of the season Eddie and I had talked about, is that the Ducks were playing Gibson too much. And we were saying, hey, you need to play Stolarz in there. And then you remember they had issues, and they had Dostal up. They had Eckerson Ek up too. I mean, they had both of them were out, and all kinds of things were going on. So 100%, I think the game plan, regardless of what you do at the trade deadline, is you get Dostal in there, get him as many looks as you can, and like you said, you want him on that roster, the rest of the season. Get him that playing time, get him ready for next season. Also, another great point you said. A lot of people attack Gibson this season for the way he's played and whatnot, but I mean, let's just be real. Look at the Ducks' defense. It's been like the worst, if not one of the worst in the league. I mean, come on, they've just been horrible. The defense has been terrible. We've seen them turn over the puck a bazillion times, put Gibson in bad situations, giving up, I want to say it's around 40 shots a game on net. I mean, it's just stupid how many shots on goal that the Ducks allow. It's a league high, too, as well, as far as shots on goal that they give up, and that hasn't changed. That's, I think, another point is it's hard to evaluate Gibson's value because, as you point out, yes, you have that contract. You have him signed. He's $6.4 million through the 26-27 season. You try to get a boatload of a return, like you said, but now his numbers don't look as good, which is what was also mentioned in the NHL.com article. So trying to evaluate that, I think it's tough to do that. I know Elliot Freeman did mention his article. He says that the Ducks and Gibson would like to find him a, quote, new home. So that's kind of an interesting thing in my mind, because now are they trying to work on something there, to actually get him to another team? And we know that he's been connected to Pittsburgh. Obviously, he has family out there. That's a name that's been up there. You mentioned Buffalo again. I saw some other people talk about L.A. I don't see L.A. I don't know why L.A.'s come up a couple times. But. No
way. I mean, would they want him? Sure, but if L.A. makes a trade with the Ducks like that, the Ducks are going to say, you give us even more than anyone else if we're giving you, this quality of goaltender.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the last game where the Ducks played the Kings and Gibson and Copley almost went at it at center ice, which, oh man, I was like, I thought it was going to happen. It didn't. So, I mean, to me, the freeway faceoff of old kind of returned in that game. I don't see that happening. I mean, that would be an earth-shattering trade. If Gibson went to the Kings, I think I would lose my mind. I don't think I would be able to handle that, Thomas.
I think the only way that would happen is if the Ducks trade Gibson elsewhere, and then wherever, like let's say they trade him to, I'm just going to name a random team, St. Louis, and then St. Louis trades him to LA. That's how it would have to go. Like the Ducks, like I think it was
like a double trade.
Yeah, when Martin Jones was in LA, they traded him out of conference. I think it was to Boston or something, and then Boston turned around and traded Martin Jones to San Jose. And the Kings were like, "Well, that's what we didn't want to happen. We didn't want him to stay in our division." Of course, at that point, Jones started imploding, so it wasn't that big a deal. But I remember LA was annoyed at that point because they wanted him out of the division, and there he was. So I think that what you have to take is you have to ship him to St. Louis, and then the Blues turn around and trade him to LA without the Ducks knowing that was going to happen. They'd be like, "Well, dang it."
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know why people bring up LA again. I'm like, nah, I don't think so. And yeah, I think what you said, it'd have to be some kind of three-way trade, or where it's like that double trade deal where that they make one trade and then another trade right after it or whatever, something up that alley. But I was thinking about Stolarz too, and I was thinking the Ducks should trade him and try to get something, but then. I think about it, and you're right. I mean, like, what kind of value are they going to get for him? I mean, he's a UFA at the end of the season. His contract's just under $1 million. Yeah, his numbers haven't been great either, but we already know, like we said, the Ducks' defense has been terrible. None of the goalies are going to have great numbers. So it's interesting. What do they do? I mean, if they do try to find him a home, like Elliot Friedman talked about, he did mention on the Duck stream. He said, quote, "I would like to think John Gibson would like to be somewhere else where the cycle is closer to winning." And then he said, he added, "I don't think it's because he's unhappy." I mean, that's kind of interesting because we've heard grumblings of Gibson being frustrated. We'd seen some of these games where, multiple goals are scored, bad turnovers, bad defense, and you can see that he's not happy, at least with the play of the defense in those games. Now, is he not happy to the point where he wants to go to another team? That's what I think is interesting because that did come up last season, and then the agent came out and denied that. So I'm wondering, there is some smoke here going on with this. So I'm very curious to see if he's traded. I don't think he is traded at the deadline. I mean, I obviously think there's discussions. I mean, there's been discussions already. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. But I don't know. Maybe they don't do it. Maybe they wait till the summer, Thomas. I mean, what do you think on this whole situation?
And the summer always is, quote unquote, easier to make the trade because you don't have to worry about the cap as much. You tend to have just more assets to play with at the time. So summer, the draft is an easier time to do it. So I think that does make a lot more sense. You typically also have more teams in the running. Right now, there's only a handful of teams who Gibson makes sense going to in the summer. That might open up a little bit. Then again, teams can only have 2 goaltenders, so you still are working with a limited market. So I do think the draft makes more sense than right now. I also think, how can he not be? Of course, he's frustrated. How can you would not be human if you were not frustrated with the team. But there's just being frustrated with this season and being actually upset and unhappy and wanting to leave. Like, those are 2 very different things to me. So, is he frustrated? Yes. Does he want to leave? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think...
Like, we all have bad days at work. We're like, God, I don't want to be here anymore, right? Like, We've all been in that situation. But you also feel like, this is maybe not a great place to work, but, I enjoy it most of the time. And that's the question. Does Gibson enjoy being a Duck most of the time still because of other factors besides, the game itself? And that, I have no idea.
And see, this is where I think this ties back into the defense. I think this trade deadline, the whole thing hinges on what they do. And you talked about it. If they don't not trading Klingberg is a big loss in this deadline. Like, he needs to go, and I still think Kulikov or Shattenkirk needs to go, and the Ducks need to get this blue line back, in shape. I mean, Vakanainen out, Drysdale out. Those guys definitely. I thought they played decent when they were in. Obviously, it's not been for a long period of time, so it's not really saying too much. But I think that's one thing that if they can fix that somehow and get it, maybe if there's someone out there. I mean, I don't know if there's a guy that you think the Ducks should go try to get instead of just getting picks and prospects. I mean, is there a guy on the blue line that? I mean, we talked about this before, like when the Ducks won the Stanley Cup, right? They had Pronger and they had Niedermeyer, right? You see, is this trade deadline to you about just, hey, we're just going to keep this rebuild going, or do you think maybe there are some targets for the Ducks out there? It's not just, hey, we're just going to sell and trade off these players. Like, how do you feel this one's going to go?
I think it's more about picks and prospects rather than NHL players, but this summer, depending on how things go, you could start looking at free agency or even other trades and saying, okay, player X is available, player Y is available. That's who we want to target to make this blue line better. But in the Ducks right now, I would argue their two best prospects are defensemen in Zellweger and Midjikov. And like you said earlier, defensemen take a long time to become not just good NHL players, but great NHL players. So they're not going to be, and one or both may play for the Ducks next season. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. But neither of them are going to be an impact top four defensemen that start to help turn this team around. They won't be at that point for probably 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer, depending on how that development goes. I would love it to be shorter, but other than Cale Makar and Adam Fox, it's going to take a little more time for most defensemen to get there. So right now, there's not one I have in mind specifically, but I just think the more picks you get, the more prospects you get, the better. Let's call it Drew Helleson. Let's see what he can do against NHL competition. He was called up back in November, I think. Didn't play, but let's give him that NHL time.
Yeah, I'm with you. White was, another one with Strand that I talked about earlier in the show. Throw them in the mix. They surprisingly seem to do well in the limited action that they had. I'd like to see more of that. I do think the full rebuild would be, like you said, you do Klingberg, Kulikov, or Shattenkirk, or maybe both. You get picks, prospects, and maybe you do dole out Gibson. If you can get a huge return for him and you're okay with it. I mean, it really depends on where Verbeek's head is in this. I mean, if they are trying to find him another place where he wants to win, if that's legit, I mean, that's what Elliot Freeman's saying. A lot of his stuff is on the mark, but sometimes he says stuff to say stuff. I hate to say it, but he does. So, I don't know how much validity there is in both sides wanting to move. If there's a lot of traction to that, then you may see Gibson and Ducks get a bunch. And, I mean, we could be in for a huge, huge trade deadline as far as speeding up this rebuild. I personally don't think it's going to happen with Gibson. That's just my take. I think maybe they do try to do something with Stolarz and get a high pick. I don't know if that's going to materialize. I think, like you said, it's kind of tough to do that. That's kind of where I'm at with this. I just don't. I don't know. It's interesting because if there's another report out there other than Elliot Freeman's, then fine. Because the NHL.com website was just one talking about whether the Ducks go full rebuild by trading Gibson, or do they try to keep him, build around him and get the team going. And I think that's a huge question for Verbeek. What does he do? I mean, do you keep Gibson and try to build up around him defensively? Or is Dostal your guy in the future? Because it's not Stolarz. We know that. They would have tried to re-sign him or do something. I don't see him being the lead guy. So it's an interesting point in time where the Ducks are at, either this trade deadline or summer. I think they have to make a choice, Thomas. I think that they're going to have to decide between Gibson and Dostal at some point.
I think they will, but I think they've got time. So, like I said earlier, you want to play Dostal as much as you can this year, and you go into next year with Dostal as your backup. And if Gibson's your starter, that's great. Gibson starts, let's say he gets 50, 60 games, Dostal gets somewhere in the 30-game mark, and I think that'd be good. And then I think if Dostal next year is good enough in those 30-plus games, then that summer is when you really say, okay, now let's trade Gibson and turn the reins over to Dostal. Because goaltending, we've seen with Gibson, it's a very volatile position, and it's hard to say how good or bad a goalie will be from one year to the next. So I want Dostal to have as much time in the NHL before trading Gibson. But if you do trade Gibson, you do need an NHL veteran to help out Dostal. And I don't know who that would be, but I wouldn't want to, next year, if it's Dostal Stolarz, I really wouldn't want that for the Ducks.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I lean towards them not trading Gibson right now, because you're right. I mean, if you bring Dostal up, right, and say they don't re-sign Stolarz, or they do, and it's them two, and then Gibson's gone, I mean, is he quite ready yet? I don't know. That's why I'm kind of leaning more towards they don't trade Gibson, at least at the trade deadline. Unless they're going to go out, like you said, and there's another NHL-type goalie that can, like a Miller type, right? A veteran guy that's going to be there and mentor Dostal, but not necessarily be your every night starter. If that's a direction maybe that Verbeek wants to go into, I could see something like that. But you're right. If you trade Gibson, it's Dostal, and then you don't even know who the backup is. I mean, that's going to be scary next season.
Yeah.
So, a lot to talk about. I mean, with this team, I think another thing that you brought up, kind of thinking outside of the box, maybe people haven't talked about this as much, but Henry Thrun, kind of disappointing. He did not sign with the Ducks. I'll let you kind of explain that. Some people freaked out and thought it was like a loophole, but I'll let you talk about that because you cover the prospects. You write a lot of articles in the summertime, and you also cover a lot of stuff with the Gulls during the season. Just kind of get your take on that, and if you think, because the Ducks do still have his rights, if maybe that's a trade that can factor somewhere in here in the trade deadline. So what's your take on the Thrun situation? Why he didn't sign, and what do you think is going to maybe happen?
So for Thrun, for any player drafted out of college, the instant you sign a pro contract, you are no longer eligible to play NCAA hockey because NCAA are supposed to only be amateur players. So if you sign a contract, you can no longer play college hockey, and therefore you are either in the NHL or AHL or ECHL, frankly, depending on who you are. If you play 4 years of college hockey and you don't sign a contract with the team that drafted you, I believe the date is August 15th. After your senior year, you become a free agent. It is not a loophole. It's just a choice a player can make. And most players who are going to be stars or even very good players are not going to spend 4 years in college, let's be honest. Most of them within a year or two, CZ Zegras last year, Matthew Knies in Toronto is a sophomore now. He's probably going to sign after this season and join them. Most players who are likely stars or even just good players are going to sign within 1 to 2 years, maybe within 3. So most players aren't going to play 4 years and then become a free agent unless they aren't considered a very good prospect. Now, Thrun is an exception to the rule. I don't think he's going to be a star, but I think he's going to be a very good, just all-around number 4, number 5 guy someday. He is not elite in any one category, but I do think he is just very well-rounded in almost every category, and I love players like that. So it's disappointing to see him say, you know what, I don't want to sign with you, Anaheim. But, it's February. I appreciate he told the Ducks 6 months in advance, so they've got time to figure out what to do with him. And here's the nice thing. The trade deadline isn't actually going to impact trading Thrun. They can trade him later on. The trade deadline is all about players who are eligible to really play for your team in the playoffs. So, the Ducks and the Blackhawks could make a trade in April. And it wouldn't mean anything because the teams aren't going to the playoffs, so they could make whatever deal they wanted in that situation. Now, for Thrun, he is on the team's reserve list. So that means the Ducks own his rights, even though he's not signed to a contract. And because he's on the reserve list, he might need to be on a team's reserve list to join for the playoffs. So, let's say he's traded to Carolina. If they want him to possibly use in the playoffs, he might need to be on their reserve list before the trade deadline. So he might need to be traded before then. But if he's going to be traded to, let's say, because, again, he's a good young defenseman. He's young. There's 31 teams in the league who want him. So I could see Chicago. I could see Columbus. They could call the Ducks and say, hey, we want Thrun. You can make that deal after the deadline. So that doesn't have to be done, real soon. That can be done a month or 2 from now. Now, the danger is, what can you actually get for him? Thrun was a 4th-round pick. What can you get for him realistically? Maybe a 3rd-round pick if the team's really desperate, really like him that much. Maybe a 2nd-round pick. But they also have to be sure they're going to be able to sign him. Because you can trade him to whoever you want, but he does not have to sign there, and he can still become a free agent on August 15th. Now, my hope is because he told the Ducks so early on that he doesn't want to sign there, he's expecting to be traded, and he, in a way, almost has a no-trade clause because, again, if he's traded to San Jose and he doesn't want to sign there, he doesn't have to and becomes a free agent. So maybe he's told the Ducks, say, hey, here are teams I would actually consider signing with, here are teams I would not consider signing with, and that could play a role into where he's dealt. Or, the Ducks could just not tell anyone what he's thinking, and that's the risk a team has to take by taking him on. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with that. The Ducks will hold his rights until August, and then on the 15th, he's a free agent. He can sign where he wants, and nothing happens. Given how good of a prospect I think he is, I really hope that doesn't happen. But that is a real possibility that could happen.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of leaning towards. I almost think that's going to happen because, like you're talking about, yeah, he did give them notice. Yes, they have 6 months, which is great. And like you said, you have that time till August, so that's helps out and gives the Ducks time. But I mean, unless there's someone he really wants to go to, I mean, like you said, the Ducks could trade him to someone, and then he tells them to pound sand because he still has to sign with that other team.
Yeah, it's a risk for any team to acquire him because he holds the power in that regard. So I almost feel like the Ducks are going to say, hey, who do you want to sign with? And those are the teams we're going to talk to. But yeah, who knows? His will be. I'm not really seeing in all the trade articles, no one's really talking about him leading up to the deadline. He's actually one that could really tip the scale. So, again, Buffalo, they want players that they can have for the next several years, not just a rental. I think they would be a team like Buffalo, Detroit. Those are teams that would be very, Ottawa maybe also as well, very interested in Thrun because he can join them for the next several years. It's not just there for a couple of months and be done.
Yeah, that's why I almost wonder if he could be packaged with somebody, if it happens at the deadline.
Yeah, I think him being part of a package deal would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so something else to monitor there. Any other, as we wind it down, any other trades on this show that maybe you see the Ducks involved in, or any other teams that maybe you think that keep an eye on, as the trade deadline comes up?
So earlier today, the Ottawa Senators traded Zaitsev to Chicago, and I think they gave the Hawks also a second-round pick to take that salary. That was a deal I was really hoping the Ducks would be in on. They need AHL bodies. They trade away half their defense. Give us Zaitsev, and give us the pick. Yes, please. So anyone like that, I really want the Ducks to be in on. And I know there are players like that, like we already mentioned, like Pugliarvi. Also, one more note on Thrun. I think if he's not traded by the draft, I think the odds of him just becoming a free agent in August increase considerably. So I think the Ducks really have up to the draft to trade his rights. If not by then I think he just walks on August 15th. But the good news is, like we said earlier, Jackson Lacombe is expected to sign with the Ducks when his call-up season is over. He was a second-round pick in actually the year that Thrun was chosen in the fourth round. I think Thrun is the more well-rounded player, but Lacombe is the more offensively gifted player. He was a forward who converted to defense, so he's got a very interesting skill set for the back end. So I would like to see him, like I said earlier, in Anaheim before the year is over. Kind of like Terry did when he first signed with the Ducks. His season at Denver ended. He signed with the Ducks. He played only a handful of games the rest of the way. But let's give him some NHL experience if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And yeah, you're right. I think Thrun, even though it's August, you're probably right. If nothing happens by the draft, then it's done. So I guess one last thing that we'll kind of finish up with has been a topic. Our other writer, George, put this together an article, which we'll put out soon. And it's a question a lot of people have talked about because I've gotten mixed reviews from people. I've gotten people that they don't go to the games or they don't watch as much and they're frustrated with the rebuild and they think the rebuild is taking too slow. I've even seen people not happy with Verbeek. It's only his first full season, but there's people are upset and I get it. I mean, the Ducks are plus minus goal differential of over minus 100 now. I mean, it's crazy. Not the worst ever in the league, but I mean it's really bad. So. The question here, I guess, kind of looking at what's going on with the team, we have this, this will be the second trade deadline with Verbeek, and it's, we're coming up, roughly a year or so with him being in the organization doing stuff. Do you think the rebuild is going in the wrong direction? Is it too slow? Is there more that Verbeek should be doing? I mean, is there anything I guess you would change at this point? I mean, it's only been a year, but people are freaking out. So, just kind of what's your take on that? We'll wrap up the show on this point.
So, a couple of things about that. I think first, if you're looking back to Bob Murray's final use before Verbeek joined, then yes, it is taking too long because Murray should have started this process sooner. Verbeek, though, he's only been there for a year. He accelerated it. I like the deals he made last year. I don't love the deals he made. But he got solid returns. But let's look at Lindholm, for example. He has been phenomenal this season. He's been one of the best defensemen in the league, arguably the best defenseman on the best team in the league. And if the Ducks and Bruins knew how good he was going to be this year, no question, Ducks would have gotten more for him a year ago. But no one knew. Last year, once he was with Boston, he was good. He wasn't great. This year, he has legitimately been great. And if you knew how good he was going to be this year, you would have gotten a better return. So I would have liked to see Verbeek get a little more on all the deals he made last year. I think the exception is the Delorier deal, since we got him for a fourth-round pick and traded for a third-round pick. Love that. That's great use of assets. But Raquel, Manson, Lindholm, I would have liked to see more from all of them. That being said, those were all solid deals. He got a lot of picks. He got a couple of prospects in Hellison and Klang, and he got good value, not great value. So I'm hoping this time around he can get great value. But again, given the season the Ducks are having, he's not going to get a first for Klingberg. It's just not going to happen. If he can get 2 seconds, I would love that at this point. So it's hard. I don't think the rebuild is, just from Verbeek's perspective, going too slow. I do think he was handcuffed because it wasn't started sooner by Bob Murray like it should have been.
I think no, that's a great point. No, go ahead. That's a great point.
And I also think that the three big free agency made in the offsummer were Toronto, Strome, Klingberg. None of those have worked out great. Klingberg was the one who I was really hopeful on and has just been not good. Strome and Toronto, I kind of always viewed them as more complementary pieces rather than true top 6 forward. I think Toronto is a great third line winger. He gets a lot of shots off. He's fast. He's smart. He's not the best offensive abilities, so I want that kind of player on my third line. He's often used in the top 6 this year because the Ducks have no one else there instead. So if the Ducks had a better top 6 and could have the Toronto and or Strome on the third line, they're a much deeper team. Then those deals, I think, look a lot better. So the free agent deals he signed, they weren't great, but I don't think they were terrible. I think Klingberg, Strome, and Toronto were not terrible. They haven't worked as well. With a better team, though, I think they would have worked a lot better.
Yeah, I think you summed it up nicely. I think the big thing that people forget is, and you said it, that Verbeek was handcuffed by Murray and the stuff that he had done previously. And I think absolutely, and I think he did what he needed to do in the last trade deadline. And definitely you can argue that he could have gotten more for some people. And like you said, yes, you look at Lindholm after the fact and whatnot, of course. But he did the moves he had to make then. He did make the moves in the summer. I'm with you. I was really happy that Klingberg was coming in. I thought, hey, I knew that they had the option of flipping him, but I kind of hoped that he was going to be a guy to stay there and be big to help the Ducks, and he really didn't work out. But Toronto and Strome, they're kind of where I expected them. I mean, Vetrano's got 15 goals, so he can still get to the 20-goal mark. Strome's at 11. Maybe it's going to be kind of tough. You only got 24 games or so left to go. I don't know if he's really going to reach it, but they're kind of where I thought they were going to be offensively. Defensively, yeah, not really the best. Like you said, not necessarily both top 6 guys, but with what the way the Ducks lineup's been, they've been top 6, definitely top 9. So I don't think it's going in the wrong direction. I think, yes, people are frustrated. Yes, the defense has been god-awful. And I think, for me, what happens at this trade deadline is really going to set it up going forward. And if not a lot happens, and only a couple little things happen here or there, then, yeah, maybe we revisit it. But, as far as it's gone, and it's only been a year, I think you're right. He was dealt a hand. It wasn't the worst hand, but I mean there were things that he had to do to fix it, and I think he handled it well last time. So I think here he's got another opportunity to really speed it up, or at least make some more moves to get it back on track. So I don't think it's going in the wrong direction. I just think that unfortunately it's not as fast as maybe some people want it to be, Thomas.
And another problem also, not just Murray, but a number of players, frankly, like Raquel and Holmanson in the last few years before they were traded, they were not as good as they were in previous years. Like, Raquel had back-to-back 30-goal seasons, and then after that, just, he didn't even hit 20 goals until I think he'll hit that this year if he hasn't already. So his value was much lower than it should have been, which is, again, one of the reasons why he did not bring back a first-round pick like I thought he could have. But, if you're trading a proven 30-goal winger, you're going to get that first-round pick back. But when he hasn't hit 30 goals in a number of seasons, you're not going to get that first-round pick back. So do I want more out of those trades? Yes, but given how those players had been trading, how they've been playing up to that point, the returns make a lot of sense, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you touched on it too earlier in the show. Sometimes players get traded to other teams, and then chemistry, coaching, ice time, whatever it is, a lot of factors that can change. Analytics with line mates. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to look at those afterwards and go, oh man, like we should have got all this, and that. Well, I mean, I thought he did pretty good, like you said. So. I would say patience, but we're going to have that article. I'm going to post that soon from George. So he's going to give his take on the rebuild and if it's going in the wrong direction. So you guys can read that leading up to the trade deadline. And we'll have this podcast. And then I don't know exactly what I'm going to do on trade deadline. I don't know if we're going to do a live show. We'll definitely do one recapping it for sure. So look forward for that. The show's kind of in flux the next month or so. Thomas will definitely probably be on here for a majority of it as we finish out this season. So, again, check out all the articles he does. He does a great job. Follow all our stuff. We appreciate all the support. And, have some patience, and we'll see what happens at the trade deadline. And let's go Ducks.